Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is Ann DeSantis, the director, and this is our monthly Families in Crisis podcast. And here I'm joined with the president of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, Mickey Kelly. Mickey, thank you so much for joining us again for this podcast.
Well, I was just thanks, Ann. Well, I just want to let you know, I was just listening to Bon Jovi before we were getting ready to record, and I was just remember that the chorus in Living on the Prayer. Whoa, we're halfway there, since this is like the fourth Beatitude we're covering of 8. So, yeah.
That's right, Living on a Prayer. And this one is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And Mickey's right. I mean, this is the fourth one. So this is podcast number 4 for this 8-part series. And I want to encourage all of you listening that if you haven't listened to the other ones, just be sure to go back. We started with, of course, number 1 a few months back, and it's on our YouTube channel at Philly Nonnatus. It's also on our St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation Facebook page. And you can also find it, I believe it's on our website too, under our podcast page. So without further ado, let's get right into the topic, Mickey. So I'll just say this one again. It's, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And we're talking to you, our listeners, who are affected by some kind of a family crisis, whether it be divorce and separation, relationship issues, a job loss, sickness, all of the other facets of what can bring those adversities to family life. So, Mickey, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to share to begin with on that whole idea of hungering and thirsting for righteousness.
Yes, and I think there's a couple things we can definitely look at. And the first thing is, I was just reading a blog from someone that contributes to the Word of Truth. I think that's like a sector under Bishop Robert Barron. One of the things that I kind of noticed, and I was just like going through them recently, the first 3 Beatitudes mainly concern us, and with the fourth one, it sets like a little bit. There's like a bit of a shift here, and what it is that it's a little more like, I kind of look at it something a little more positive than what the first 3 offer. And we have to understand that with this fourth Beatitude here is that we are challenged by what's around us, basically. And let's face it, like, we look at the recent events over the years where the Catholic faith has been attacked, it's been smeared, it's been mocked. You know, you look at these elite celebrities, they're always like finding a way to put Catholics in the punchline, or oftentimes too, like, you know, people saying like the Catholic Church is irrelevant, it's old and frail. Well, they haven't been to a World Youth Day gathering. I can assure you that it is not old and frail. You're just watching too much CNN. So that's one thing that really jumps to mind here, is that we are striving to do what is right and just every time we proclaim that at Mass. And let's face it, one of the prime examples that I could really think of with this beatitude is we look at the pro-life movement. For over half a century, they have marched, whether it's in Washington, and now we're seeing something out in the West Coast in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And of course, too, now like there's these marches too that are coming on a local level, like let's say on the city and eventually on the state level. And perhaps once this unconstitutional, barbaric decision that was decided by 7 out of 9 men on the Supreme Court back in 1973, this would draw the lines to, let's say, on the city as well as the state levels. And some of that we're already seeing now. But, only time will tell. And I think it'll be very interesting to see that. But back to the point here. And we also have seen Catholics over the years that have done things such as, protecting what is true, good, and beautiful. Especially, I look at the example of the missionaries from Generation Life and the Culture Project, how they go inside these classrooms and they remind people of what the virtue of chastity is. And granted, the students may think they want to mock these missionaries. I'm not sure that happens at the Catholic school. If it does, we got a problem. But I can understand they get attacked because at the secular schools, because they don't really understand most of it unless they go to youth group gatherings or whatever the case is. But honestly, if we look at the history of the church, and let's also look at the early church, because they were preaching, the gospel of Christ to every corner of the globe. And 9 out of 10 of these people, they were killed, for their witness to Christ.
Yeah, thank you for sharing on that. I was kind of hoping that as we began this podcast that you would touch on that particular topic, because that certainly is a hunger for righteousness, isn't it? When we see what has happened in our world and that life is not honored from the moment of conception until natural death. And I also want to just thank you, Mickey, for the work that you've done over the years with praying in front of abortion facilities, and really giving so much of your time and your life to that, and to the challenge that poses, because not everyone, even people who are listening, they may be pro-life, but taking that step to actually go to a facility and pray is something different. And so I just want to thank you and other people who have done that, and also people who have prayed for it. And I think this is an interesting beatitude to talk about, because we are talking about a blessing for those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I pulled up this article. It's on Catholic Culture, and the article is entitled, "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness." And it is, these words are actually coming right from our Holy Father. And so even though it is an article that I pulled up, the Holy Father says this. He says that we've already encountered a poverty in spirit and mourning. Now we face another type of weakness, that connected to hunger and thirst. Hunger and thirst are primary needs which relate to survival. This must be highlighted. Here we do not talk about a generic desire, but rather a vital daily need such as nourishment. And he just goes on, and I'll read a little bit more. It says that, but what does it mean to hunger and thirst for righteousness, for uprightness or for justice? We're certainly not talking about those who want revenge. On the contrary, in the previous beatitude, we spoke about meekness, which was last month on our podcast, of course. Certainly, injustice wounds humanity. Human society has an urgent need for equality, truth, and social justice. Let us remember that the evil suffered by the women and men of the world reached the heart of the Father, which Father would not suffer for the pain of his children. I thought we could just back up a little bit in what he just said there, Mickey, that we're not talking about those who want revenge. He says, on the contrary. So I don't know if we want to talk about that. I know you and I have talked about revenge too, even when we did the Cardinal Virtue series. So this is something different. Mickey, what do you think is different about this one compared to having revenge for someone?
Well, I think we also see too, Anne, is that mercy is involved one way or another. Well, of course, I know we're going to be unpacking blessed are the merciful, and it's kind of straightforward. But this, I mean, let's all face it, like I kind of think of everything overlapping each other. And what I honestly, what the person's saying here is that, it's not that, let's face it, that there's a time for mercy, and revenge is not really how you fulfill this beatitude. And, you get people that bully you or mock you, whatever the case is, you can't, I mean, Martin Luther King once said that love can be defeated by hate. I'm just paraphrasing him, by the way. And of course, the only way you can defeat darkness is light. That's something that he would say. But I also was really struck by a remark that Padre Pio once said, that my past, O Lord, to your mercy, my present to your love, and my future to your providence. And even too, something that really pops out to me is from the 45th chapter of Isaiah, in which Isaiah says, those hungering and thirsting for righteousness are those waiting for God's righteousness, the fulfillment of God's promise to restore the people to freedom and prosperity. And I think what Isaiah is trying to tell us here is that when we wait for God's righteousness, there will be a land that will be filled with God's freedom and his prosperity every time that we invoke his name.
Yes, invoking his name has a lot of power, and it's a prayer, I think, isn't it? And they call
I
that,
agree, sure.
Yeah, they call that an aspiration, to the Lord, when you just say, Lord, help me, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, Lord, be with me at this time. I mean, it's a special prayer that we can speak when we're at our time of need, where we know that we need God, his providence, we need his care, we need his love. And I think in this particular beatitude as well, we can look at the fact that we need his righteousness, and not in the way that this article says, that Pope Francis talks about, that whole idea of getting that revenge. That's not the righteousness. And this article continues to say that in the scriptures, we find the expression of a thirst more profound than the physical one, which is a desire found at the root of our being. And then the psalmist says, God, you are my God. I pine for you. My heart thirsts for you. My body longs for you as a land parched, dreary, and waterless. That's from Psalm 63:2. The fathers of the church speak about this restlessness which inhabits the heart of man. And St. Augustine says, thou madest for thyself, and our hearts are restless until we rest with thee. So there's an inner thirst and an inner hunger. It's a restlessness. And I think that's also a good topic for all of us who are listening, especially people who are in crisis, people who have been through some kind of an adversity. And, the foundation has helped all kinds of people in that whole spectrum, whether it be anyone from a divorced or separated to someone who has a sickness, a job loss, even a psychological or an emotional distress of some kind. And we get people who contact us all the time who wish to have an appointment with us to talk about those needs. And that's what I think that call to mission also is all about in the church. It is that idea that we're there for one another, aren't we? And I think even when we examine these Beatitudes, we can examine the fact that I think in some sense we all feel that need for righteousness when we see the things that are happening in the world, and we question and say, Lord, how could you allow the things that I see? So, Mickey, I don't know, related to that, I didn't know if you had anything to say, because you have certainly, as I've said in the podcast earlier, you've seen a lot in terms of that hungering and thirsting for righteousness when you see, in the work that you do for pro-life. And that would go, just to make sure that I mention this too, that's not just from conception until the baby is born. That's throughout the entire lifespan. Because I know the work that you do, Mickey, helps to bring that righteousness to the young mothers who decided to keep their children.
Sure. And so I think one of the things that kind of pops out on me with your remark is that, we always hear the common thing where people saying, oh, you're just pro-birth. You just don't care about the baby after they're born. When in reality, I think it's them. That's the naysayers that keep saying it. But I am aware of the fact that pregnancy resources, and I'm just not just saying that it's in our general area where our operation is, and this is we operate in a secret location that is not even known to Darth Vader, of course. But back on top, but back to my point is that some of the pregnancy group resource crisis groups, such as Legacy of Life, Alpha Pregnancy, they develop a very close relationship with the client and also to the pro-life union in Greater Philadelphia as well. And they walk with them for, let's say, up to about 5 years. And by that time, maybe that kid that was spared from abortion would be through pre-K or through kindergarten. And there's let me put it this way. That's a connection for life. No pun intended, of course, but they're connected for the rest of their lives. And there'll be times maybe they hit some bumps on the road. And some of these single moms, they will also be equipped with some tools, such as job skills, life skills, home economics, you name it. And there'll be volunteers. There'll be like a pool of volunteers that would visit these homes, and time after time, they will go in and show these people. And believe me when I tell you, like from the conversations I had with many of these people that run these homes, some of them are awestruck that they've never learned how to do this, how they learned to do that. It's like, I honestly think for them, it's a very humbling experience. And it's like it's a skill they have in their back pocket, of course. And then I remember one mom that I encountered that when she decided not to go through with the abortion, and after the baby was born, she decided to go back to school, and she's now working as a nurse by the grace of God. And all because it was, and who helped her? It wasn't Planned Parenthood. It wasn't, it wasn't, their local politician or anything. It was the pro-life union in Greater Philadelphia. And they were walking through her, 3 to 5 years after the baby was born, and they form a lifelong connection. And that's all it takes. And I think that's something we need a little more. I always think of, the road to Emmaus, where like Jesus had accompanied the apostles after the events of the crucifixion and the resurrection, everything, it comes between the resurrection to, the period to the ascension, everything. And some of the events weren't really recorded in the Gospels, but I think that's something we really have to and I think that's a metaphor to really understand these these connections that, local pro-life groups would form, and as well as pregnancy centers too, with the moms after they decide not to go through with the abortion.
Yeah, what wisdom that you're sharing with us, especially for people who don't know much about it. Some people, they're very much bothered by what they see is going on in the world in terms of how abortion, happens in our world, and people don't always choose life. So I think it's good to hear your perspective as a person who knows so much about it, person who's worked in it, and you've invited me to be a part of it too. And I'm really honored that I've been able to make that time when I'm able to pray and to be a part of the pro-life movement. So, it really is for not just about after the baby is born. It's that support that is offered afterwards from the younger mothers to places like, and whatever age the mother is, but places like you mentioned, the Alpha Care and other nonprofits that are doing good work to bring those resources. And bringing it back to our topic again here with the hungering and thirsting for righteousness, I think that's all part of it. When we care about all aspects of life, we're talking about particularly the end of abortion, but of course we have helping the homeless, feeding the poor, the sick, making outreach to them. And so that's all part of it too. And going back to what I was looking at this article, talks about the idea that, that struggle that we have sometimes between good and evil. And this is still from Pope Francis. He says that in every heart, even in the person who is most corrupt and farthest from goodness, there's a hidden yearning for the light, even if it is found under the rubble of deceit and errors. But there is always the thirst for truth and goodness, which is thirst for God. It's the Holy Spirit that inspires this thirst. He is the living water that has molded our dust. His is the creative breath that gave it life. I think that's really good to ponder for all of us. One thing is, and I know Pope Francis has said this often, especially when he first became Pope, he said that he's a sinner. And I think we all are sinners. There's all areas of our lives that we are not perfect. And when we go down the list of Beatitudes or the 10 Commandments or the cardinal virtues like you and I did before, and we examine ourselves that on a daily basis, how we're not always honoring God in all that we do, how we're not making outreach to people, especially people who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, people who need us, right? People who need our care, our prayer, our love. And that brings me to, and Mickey, maybe we can talk about this, the work that we're doing. The work that we're doing with this foundation that we represent through the Mercedarian Friars. And I know I try to do this on every podcast, but I want to thank them for founding us back in 2015 after they had attended the World Meeting of Families. And so some people might ask us, like, why do you always say families in crisis? Like, why is that your main focus? And that was specifically because of that event that happened when we had the Year of Mercy and Pope Francis came to the United States. He did the Mass, they had meetings, and Pope Francis made a call out to everyone. He said, what can we all do to help make families' lives easier, better? And how can we make better support and outreach to them? And so that was when a couple of our friars from the order decided that's what we need to do. And so, Mickey, I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit about that world meeting, because I do think we can really, even though it's been like 7 years already, I think we can look back and say the fruit of that is something like this foundation and what we're trying to do, because we've, at this point, I think we've really helped hundreds of people, not just through our one-on-one consultations, but also through our podcasts and videos that we've done. Even you and I, Mickey, we've done so much. Mickey, I don't know if you wanted to share that on the world meeting, because I know you were there.
I thought you were too.
I was.
Anyway, yeah, you know what, Ann? I was just kind of surprised. Yeah, it would be 7 years since that time. And I remember clearly I was walking around the convention center, I say Tuesday through Thursday for the most part, because I understand by Friday everything had to close down and get ready, because once the Pope made landfall, Secret Service, a lot of these agencies, they really got involved, and they were slow, and they were shutting down the city little by little, of course. And I was like so used to like the regular hustle and bustle, but then of course you had like police officers and National Guard members. They were like standing, I'll say almost like at every corner, let's say within a couple blocks from where the parkway was. And I was super close to where everything was happening. And I was just like thinking to myself, that I was also walking around some of the bars and businesses that were nearby. And I was like thinking to myself, wow, it's really booming over here. So, but I would say, yeah, I mean, I just really think that when the Pope took over, and this is just, a mere couple months before he launched the Year of Mercy. And I honestly thought he was really moved by the situation in the United States, how like half the marriages in the Catholic marriages are ending in divorce. And I think the Pope knew full well that there was a need for some people to be healed from all of the damages that were done, even the inflictions that people had to take from the culture that's saying that, like, that the culture that is embracing modernism and putting traditionalism on the margins. And let's face it, Christians today are marginalized by this whole woke culture and, modernism and everything. And we really need to first of all, we really need to stand our ground. That's something that's very important. And this whole agenda that is, and let's face it, Satan is alive because of this agenda. And we need to do a better job, holding the line or pushing back hard and even fighting harder. I always think of how when Rocky goes down during a fight, maybe he has two choices. One, he can give up, or he can get back on his feet and fight his opponent harder. And I'm sure it wasn't easy, but he trained for weeks, if not months, for a reason to win the heavyweight title, or to prove that he was one in a million, whatever the case is. And that's we as faithful Christians are called to be. One of my favorite church songs is "Onward Christian Soldiers." And even Pope Francis even reminds us, always forward, always forward. And I think that's how we can win back the culture. It's not to drink that woke Kool-Aid or anything like that. It is to stand our ground and fight onward.
Beautifully stated. And thank you for sharing the reflection also about the World Meeting of Families and the Pope's Mass. And, we were really blessed. Mickey and I both live in Philadelphia. The fact that the Holy Father visited that year. And admittedly, it was a crazy time in terms of the busyness of the city that day and those during that time. But the aftermath of it was the thoughts and feelings and expressions about the importance of that central unit of civilization, right? The family. And so I just think we're really blessed as a foundation that was a big part of how we were born, right? How the idea that the Mercedarian religious order wanted to do something for this whole idea of family life. And going back to that same article that I was looking at, the blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, it says that every person is called to rediscover what really matters, what they really need, what makes them live well, and at the same time, what's secondary and what they can do without. Now, I just think maybe we take a pause there and talk about that, rediscovering what really matters. And I think when we look at this one, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, this is one of those things that really matter, isn't it? It's one of those things that really matter, is that wishing and wanting, we hear that saying, people say a lot of times, is that, quote, wanting to make the world a better place, And my answer to that is, I think we can. I think we can help to make this world a better place. Now, is it going to be a perfect place? Not until, the second coming of Christ, right? Because there's always going to be some kind of sin in the world. There's always going to be a struggle. And we can expect that, not just now, but for the rest of all of our lives. It's never going to be a perfect world. And I don't think we can wish for a utopia here. But what we can do is try to work toward making this world a little bit more caring, a little bit more understanding, hungering and thirsting for the things that really matter to God, right? What matters to God? What matters to God are people, that they're allowed to live. I mean, as Mickey was talking about pro-life, and that's a really important part, I think, of hungering and thirsting for righteousness, is it allowing people to have that full life from the time that they were conceived until the time they're taken from this earth, at natural causes, hopefully, right? But that's, I think, something that we can all consider. Going back to that article, is just to consider what really does matter, what is important to God, and what is also important to you as a person, and thinking about that in terms of your faith and how you can pass your faith on. Let's take a few minutes and talk about that, Mickey, because that's something I think that's worth talking about to our listeners who might have children or grandchildren, that they're concerned, that don't understand this righteousness, that they look at it, as you said, as just a worldly thing, or something that doesn't have much relevance to them when they're living a worldly life. Is there anything that you, being a person in your 30s, a word of advice that you could give to people who might be very concerned for their families, that they're not understanding these Beatitudes?
3 words really comes to mind. Be an advocate. And I don't mean just, being like the type that wants to protect, the families. I mean, absolutely, yes. Because let's face it, we look at some of these videos we see, and we were scrolling through like the feeds, whether it's Instagram, Facebook. Well, I don't know if Twitter does it, but you get the point. You see these people that are doing things, and most of them are starting at a very young age, at kindergarten, with these things like, you see on the news, like with the Black Lives Matter protest, or, trying to expose people to pornography or whatever the case is at an early age. And that's very scary in my opinion. I mean, and I'm not sure my opinion, but it's a fact. I mean, some of the things that parents really need to do is they have to understand they are the first teachers. And I think that's something that's been missing. And you wonder why why children today are being exposed to, the garbage like critical race theory or Common Core, or whatever these flawful curriculums are. And there's no question in my mind. Of course, and you being a homeschool mom, there's going to be a rise in homeschooling, or even people trying to, lead an exodus from the public school system to the parochial school system. I mean, granted, they might have to struggle a little bit to put bread on the table, but the reality is that there's one education focused on building the character of the person. And I think we've seen that through Catholic education. And at the time of this podcast, Catholic schools, we came and went, of course. But one of the things that I really think that we need to do is, especially for people in their 30s, and most of them that are in their 30s right now are probably parents, is first and foremost, be an advocate for your children. Secondly, this is to the fathers. Don't be afraid to teach your children the habits of being good, faithful Catholics. And even Scott Hahn mentioned a few times that it's the father who is the faith leader in the household. And I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times, if the children see some of the good habits that their father is doing, chances are they're going to follow the father more often than the mom. So we do need the fathers. We long for the fathers to really step up their game, especially when the going gets rough, because we do need good men to step it up. That's really my 2 cents in everything, with the 3 words: being an advocate for your children. And I guess the other thing for those that are single is, don't be afraid to step in when you see your nieces and nephews or your godkids having a father figure that is missing. Step up. Recently, I was reading an article about how a defensive player for the Philadelphia Eagles stepped in when there was a young girl whose father died tragically. And the mom reached out to one of their favorite players who plays defense, and he stepped up and he went to the father-daughter dance in his place. So we do need men to really step it up. I mean, they got to stop buying the whole feminist rhetoric and be the men they were called to be by God.
I'm so glad that you offered that advice for families, and specifically for men who are listening to this podcast. And if you're a man and you're a dad, or grandfather even, how you can step up for your family that makes such a difference in terms of their faith. It makes such a difference in terms of the modeling that children do, whether they're male or female, when they see that dad has some kind of uh, a care, a practicing of their faith. That makes a really huge impact on bringing that righteousness. Let's bring it back to what we're talking about, right? I mean, the blessing are those who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness. When you hear families that are not practicing their faith and how hard that is for some, when they hunger and thirst for their families to care about that, they hunger and thirst for their kids and their grandchildren to go back to mass. They're hungering and thirsting for better relationships inside their family. Maybe there's been some divorce there. Maybe there's been some separation or some arguments that are happening in the family that people aren't getting along. And that's all part of hungering and thirsting for righteousness for you who are listening. And I want to make that outreach again. I know I say this on every podcast, but I don't think we can say it enough, is that one reason we're here is to let you know that we're here for you, that you can make that free pastoral consultation appointment by going to nonnatus.org on the priestly consultation dropdown or just the contact form. I'll even give you my email address. It's director.srnf@gmail.com. And those letters again are SRN as in Nancy, F as in Frank @gmail.com. Email me and let's set up that appointment for you. You can have as many appointments as you need, in fact. I will mention that we're not licensed counselors. We're not therapists. But what we do offer is the prayer, the care, and the outreach of the Catholic Church, all according to the Catholic Church teaching. And so you know that you can count on us for that proper catechesis and the listening ear. You know, that's what it's all about too, is that we're there to let you know that someone is there for you in your time of need. Going back to that article again, I keep referring to it because it's such a good one from Catholic culture. It says that Jesus proclaims in this beatitude, hunger and thirst for uprightness, that there is a thirst that will not be disappointed, a thirst that, if satisfied, will be satiated and will always end well, because it corresponds to the very heart of God, to his Holy Spirit, who is love, and also to the seed that the Holy Spirit has sown in our hearts. May the Lord give us this grace to have this thirst for justice, which is precisely the desire to find it, to see God, and to do good to others. Mickey, as we're coming pretty soon to a close, let's talk about those three last points that the Holy Father mentions. He says the desire to find it. So I didn't know if you had anything to say about those who listen to this podcast and think, I want righteousness, but I just don't see it anywhere. How do you think they can find righteousness in their own lives?
Mother Teresa once said that you have to find your Calcutta. Now, I'm not saying get on a plane to go to Calcutta, India, but find it in your home and then find it in your community. And let's face it, there are times that you're going to have to find things such as maybe you're suspicious. I mean, let's face it. I mean, some of the things that we long for is, when are people going to understand that God is knocking on the door of their hearts? When are people going to understand that the rhetoric they are sold now is really leaving a gaping hole on their lives? It's making them hungry for more. Even Bruce Springsteen, I don't mean to give away your age on this one, Ann, but he once had a song called Hungry Heart. And in the chorus, it's like, everybody has a hungry heart. And let's face it, we're surrounded in our culture. They're hungry for the truth. They're hungry for something that will satisfy their hungry hearts. And it's not, it's not, a bag of Dorito chips, although I think it'd be good right now after this episode's recorded, but they're hungry for more. And I always remember one of the phrases that one of the Eagles players would say when they were, when they were counted out, when they were going into the Super, when they were, when they clinched number 1 seed for the playoffs, when they won 4 years ago. the thing about the hungry dogs, they don't stop eating. They don't stop eating. And that's really what Catholics are, those Christians are these days, when it comes to the fourth beatitude. They don't stop getting hungry. And what we need to be hungry for is, for God. We're hungry for God. And we're hungry to be a part of to be a part of fulfilling his will on earth before we make it to heaven. We just need to find the people that can help us fill that void that was left in our culture. And granted, there will be people along the way that would ask you to follow them, just as the apostles followed Jesus. They all had one thing in common. Some of them had an occupation, tax collector, fisherman, whatever the case is. But Jesus called them. They dropped everything and they followed him. In the end, they were satisfied because they were fed the finest wheat from God.
So wise, your words, and the idea of being hungry. And I think that was really inspiration from the Holy Spirit, because that's the beatitude itself is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And you brought that right into, you brought the Bruce Springsteen song, of course, which I do remember, and thanks for bringing that one up. And that's a good way for us to look at that. Everybody does have a hungry heart. And when we look at it in terms of this beatitude, that last part of the article that I was just reading, it says to see God and to do good to others, because that really is really at the heart of what that hunger is. And for you who are listening, who are facing adversity, or family in crisis, or an individual who's gone through some type of a really difficult challenge, that's good advice for you. And that is the ending of that article that I read from Pope Francis that says, may the Lord give us the grace to have this thirst for justice, which is precisely the desire to find it, to see God, and to do good to others. So I think that's a good way for us to end this podcast, Mickey. I didn't know if you had any other words of wisdom.
I could say stay hungry, but I think that's overused. But one of the things that I would offer for everyone, even though I think one of the things, if I could mention one more thing, is God satisfied the hunger in your life. All it takes for you is to yearn for his righteousness and to keep fighting the good fight of the faith. We should, as long as you keep your eye on God, no matter what is thrown at you, you will soon be satisfied as you reach your ultimate goal in life, and that is heaven.
Amen. That goal is heaven. And thank you again, Mickey, for joining us here with the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation series. This is the Beatitudes Series, so you can join us again next month. We always premiere on the last Thursday of every month at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But good news, all of our podcasts are on demand, so you can go straight to the Philly Nonnatus YouTube channel or our website at nonnatus.org and learn more about us. So Mickey, thank you so much again for joining us and for all the great work that you're doing, especially your work with us as the president of our foundation.
Thank you for having me in.
God bless everyone. We'll see you next month on the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith Beatitudes Series. See you then.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@nonnatus.org.